Join me as I sit down with Dr. Julia Basso, who's a neuroscientist at Virginia Tech and the head of the Embodied Brain Laboratory, as we discuss meditation, dancing, breath work, and their impacts on the brain and body.
You know, our mission really is to examine the effects of mind-body movement practices on brain function and physiology. So things like you're talking about meditation, yoga, dance, movement in general, really exercise, aerobic exercise, on how the brain functions. So how we think, how we feel, and also the neural correlates underlying those things. And ultimately, it's so important because mental health issues are on the rise right now. About 20% or more of our population is suffering from depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a range of issues. And pharmacology often falls short. So in certain instances, like in depression, in up to 70% of the cases, it's not effective.
We also will be discussing addiction's impact on the brain, ways to decrease risks of Alzheimer's and dementia, treatments to help with postpartum depression, and much more.
We're doing this in one of our new studies on mother-child dance for moms with depression, because often in states of depression, default mode network, which is kind of our these internal states, there's a lot of negative rumination thinking, where you're kind of focused on the internal, you're not very external. It's especially for moms, right? It might be hard to connect with their partners. It might be hard to connect with their children, their babies. And so can we use these dance practices and forms of nonverbal communication to help expand their awareness, which we know it does, right? It's helping executive function. And then can we get them to then connect with baby? And so we're showing that these dance programs really help with depression. They decrease levels of depression and they increase the parent-child relationship.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Before we get started, if you could hit the like, subscribe, or follow button on whichever platform you're consuming today's show. Dr. Basso, thanks so much for the time and hosting me today. It's been a wonderful day. My hair's a little wet from, washing off some of the gel from the EEG cap, but that was a fun experience. I'm just so excited for today's conversation because the work your team is doing with meditation, dance, other somatic practices and their impacts on the body and the brain is super important and much needed right now. Thank you. So for the audience, I was wondering if you could share what the mission is of what the work you're doing at the lab and why it's so important.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. It has been a great day. The Embodied Brain Lab, we started in August 2021. And, our mission really is to examine the effects of mind-body movement practices on brain function and physiology. So things like you're talking about meditation, yoga, dance, movement in general, really exercise, aerobic exercise, on how the brain functions, so how we think, how we feel, and also the neural correlates underlying those things. And ultimately, it's so important because mental health issues are on the rise right now. About 20% or more of our population is suffering from depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a range of issues. And pharmacology often falls short. So, in certain instances, like in depression, in up to 70% of the cases, it's not effective, or there's side effects, that cause individuals not to want to take these things. So wherever people are in their journeys, these practices can really be beneficial to just help support mental health, help individuals feel better, both physically and mentally. And so our goal is to figure out how that happens.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And spot on with the increases in the mental health issues. And it's really exciting to hear that we have things that aren't a pill we have to take in order to find some relief or get better in some areas of mental health. And so that's all extremely positive. I think some of the barriers I hear from those maybe resistant to certain practices or, hey, I don't have enough time for meditation. I can't sit down for an hour. And,
that's true.
I have so much going on in my day. And so, are there things that someone could do, more practically in a day-to-day, even with a busy schedule with work and family and, normal day-to-day things going on that can help them maybe find a little bit more time for mindfulness or getting a little bit more present in their day?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, right? So it is true that it is hard, no matter, right, to find time in your day. But these things can be done in short bouts. So even, I mean, one of our first studies on meditation showed that as little as 13 minutes a day improves mood, improves cognitive function, kind of our attention, our processing speed, and also helps to decrease stress. And when we encounter what's called a psychosocial stressor, so that could be family stress or work stress, that when we meet those challenges, you are actually better able to cope with them and your stress response will be less. So even say 10 minutes a day, right? It's going to have some benefit. And even if you don't have 10 minutes, this always happens to me if I'm teaching or in some anxious moment, to just sit there, maybe close my eyes, take some deep breaths. And really what you're trying to do is you're utilizing these techniques to help improve your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system balance. So if you're hyperactivated, if you're anxious and our sympathetic, our fight flight system is overactivated, we can be mindful about that and realize, okay, this is what's happening. I'm going to just calm down, use my breath to help regulate myself. So these practices are important and they can be done in short bouts.
That's awesome. And how are you tracking the efficacy or the benefits that people are realizing? Like, what does baseline look like? And then what are the actual data collections that you're taking that are showing these improvements?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a behavioral neuroscientist by training. I love a good psychological survey. And, I've had to rein myself in over the years. But yeah, we look at depression, we look at anxiety through self-reported scales. We'll do a whole range of kind of psychological assessments where we're looking at mindfulness and happiness, positive affect, negative affect, a range of kind of mental health issues. We're interested in dissociation. So we'll keep them to kind of, such that our participants are kind of pleased with us and happy and want to continue on with the study, not too long. And then we'll do cognitive testing. So we look at things like attention, memory, processing speed. And we do this essentially through gameplay. So they'll be playing games on a computer. And we're often recording brain activity during that to see what's going on in the brain during these cognitive challenges. So we kind of take a multifaceted approach. Yeah.
Awesome. So what are the different brain waves? I'm familiar with like alpha and I think delta is like when you're deep sleep, but like what are the various levels of brain waves that would be, I guess, throughout the brain period? And then like what are the different ones typically associated with in terms of activity or what's happening within the brain?
Sure. So when we look at the brain, of course, we're recording your brain today and we saw your brain waves. When you look at that signal, there's a whole variety of brain waves within that signal. Our lowest frequency is going to be our delta. That's about 1 to 4 hertz or times per second. And they're really large amplitude waves, slow, large amplitude, and it's associated with sleep, deep sleep, dreaming states. And then when we move up to the 4 to 8 hertz range, it's associated with something called theta activity. And theta activity, yes, it's associated with drowsiness, kind of coming out of those sleep states. But new research is also showing it's associated with cognition and higher level kind of cognitive processing, spatial navigation. When we move around our environment, the hippocampus starts to oscillate in this frequency range. And so it encodes learning and memory, being able to kind of navigate through our environment, learn and remember things within our environment. As we eke up into the next phase, which is alpha, 8 to 12 hertz, it's going to be this awake but restful state. Maybe I'm calm, I'm meditating. And that's the first waveform that was found by Hans Berger, that it's these large, these amplitudes that are really prominent within the brain, especially in the occipital lobe. So you can see them very prominently. And I was showing you, right, when you close your eyes, boom, there you go. You get your alpha activity. Then you move up into beta. So you have low beta and high beta, but generally about 12 to 30 hertz or so. And this state is associated with, your mind starts to become active, busy, sometimes anxious kind of states, but studying kind of cognitive thinking. And then from there, you travel up into the gamma frequency range, which is really our highest oscillatory states. It could go, say, up to 30 to 100 hertz per se, at least in humans as we're studying it. Generally, I'll look up into the 80 hertz range and kind of call it a day there. So we kind of look across the spectrum of what's going on. But gamma, the common thought is that it's really it's gluing our consciousness together. It's these fast oscillations that help to kind of encode our conscious experience, and all of our sensory percepts ride on these waves. So it's a very important waveform.
Interesting. And we were talking about this association earlier, and you were saying I think it's most commonly occurs when you hit a gamma state is when people can potentially kind of lose track of, I guess, time and space, essentially, or maybe disassociate from their body.
Well, we were talking about this idea that, when we have our sensory inputs coming in to our body, our brain is this predictive encoder of sorts. And so when the brain is a self-organizing system, and so this gamma activity is kind of this oscillatory activity that helps to organize the system and organize all the lower frequency waveforms. And so if there's a match between the sensory input and then what the brain is expecting, right, we feel embodied, we feel grounded. Now, if there's a mismatch between those waveforms, we might have experiences of dissociation. And of course, we're the Embodied Brain Lab, so we're very interested in embodied practices. And it's those states, of dissociation that can be associated with panic disorder, anxiety. And there's that feed forward network whereby, when one becomes anxious or all of a sudden you're having a panic attack and you're feeling this mismatch between sensory input and actually what's being experienced in the conscious brain, then anxiety can increase. You might be having panic. We talked about hyperventilation, right? Yeah. So breathing becomes out of sorts. You have sympathetic nervous system overactivation. And some of these things are happening in things like autism spectrum disorder, where there's sensory issues per se, or kind of sensory mismatch of sorts. And same in panic disorder and in schizophrenia as well. And in all of those, interestingly, and we're talking about breathing, in all of those issues, mental health issues, then there's breathing impairments associated with those.
Interesting. And so if someone is having a mixed match in what they're experiencing in their outer world and what they're feeling in their inner world, that leads to a disconnection between the brain and the body. And so what types of things can cause those disruptions typically? Is this like a traumatic event has to occur, or is it just being in chronic state of sympathetic overdrive from just normal day-to-day stressors and not necessarily being able to downregulate? Or are there other things that could be factoring into this kind of disconnection between the brain and the body?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think early childhood trauma, high ACE scores, for example, these things can kind of set you up for that. Or individuals experiencing trauma through war, like veterans and so forth, right? And there might be things like hallucinations or post-traumatic stress disorder, whereby they're having these flashbacks and things like that. So yeah, trauma is definitely one thing, but even in our daily world where it is stressful and you can be in these chronic stress states, if you're in a situation where stress isn't every day and you're not having social cohorts around that, you can chat with and ways to find stress relief. Maybe you don't have a yoga or meditation or other practice, right? Those kinds of overactivated states can really lead to these kinds of things because you have the sympathetic nervous system is constantly activated, the HP axis or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, cortisol is always on board, and there's never a time to kind of rest and digest. You're never coming back into that parasympathetic. So that's really an issue. And then all of a sudden, the immune system becomes overactivated, which then is causing inflammation at the level of the gut and subsequently the level of the brain. And so that's why you see in chronic stress, right, there might be irritable bowel syndrome, or there might be arthritis or problems, at the level of the body all throughout different systems.
And so meditation itself can be helping get your brainwaves to be able to reconsolidate more uniformly, more organized, and kind of help kick your body into, I guess, to gear and connect your brain and brain to body better to make it function better. Is that?
Yeah, 100%. Because, often with the practices of meditation or even in yoga, and we were practicing yoga earlier today, and I kept talking to the students about, okay, when we're moving this way, inhale forward, exhale back, and partnering slow breathing with our movement. And so, it really helps the body and brain to integrate and connect. And, all these somatic practices, one of my favorite places is to be on the floor, just engaging all of my sensory stimuli, and I'm really feeling connected to my body. So,
That's awesome.
Feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or just plain out of sync? I've got something that could help. It's the HeartMath Institute's Coherence Monitor. This incredible tool helps you track and improve your heart rate variability, leading to enhanced emotional balance, increased focus, and improve overall well-being. I use it daily to stay grounded and perform at my best. All it takes is just a few minutes of a guided session to start to feel the difference. Visit the link in the show notes to reclaim your calm with HeartMath.
You mentioned some work you did with autism, and I think, was that more so correlated with dance, or was that with the meditation piece?
So we partnered with this wonderful group called STEP VA, which STEP is Sensory plus Theater equals Endless Possibilities. And they're a group out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. And they are essentially a musical theater and arts-based group for individuals with disabilities and their families. So it's really a family-based organization. And we got to meet a lot of families where we practice something called community-based participatory research, or CBPR, where we really worked with the families and the individuals and talking to them about what they were interested in exploring. Would they like to have their brain activity be recorded? And so they actually did a musical theater program, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And so all of it's children through adults. So it's kind of a range. And they did the production of Charlie Brown, the musical. And we recorded their brain activity after that experience. And then for before to after the musical, and in that kind of training. And in musical theater, you have dancing, you have acting, and you have singing. So kind of that triple threat of sorts.
Yeah.
And what we found was that musical theater program was really instrumental in decreasing anxiety levels. And we saw this in social anxiety, separation anxiety. So that was a really key feature of what that program did. And we started to see in looking at their neural activity, and we're still doing explorations on this, but what we see is that in the brains of these individuals, as the musical theater kind of progresses, and we see increases in what's called functional connectivity. So there's flow of information in the brain that's enhanced. And so I call it intra-brain synchrony within one's individual brain. And that's important because if you're opening up these channels of information flow within the brain, right, you might be more integrated in your sensory motor regions, that kind of things are coming together. Maybe individuals are having a better sensory experience. And then even those socio-emotional processes, that they're feeling less socially anxious, for example, which is huge. And then you can see when they get on stage, they're singing, they're dancing, they're just happy to be on stage and do that production. And even some of the individuals would then, one individual got out his ukulele and performed for us while we were recording his brain. And another one did a beautiful song. She sang from Dora the Explorer, a song that she liked. So so they really started to, express their own artistry, which is cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is where dance has kind of separated itself from traditional exercise. There are obviously a ton of great cardiovascular and health benefits from traditional exercise, but it's really the social connection and some of the emotional intra-brain activity, and I guess increases in potential emotionally awareness that is increased, that you only really see during dance and not necessarily during like going out for a run or.
Right. So I like to think of it as a multimodal form of exercise. Yeah. So we have the sensory and motor pieces like you do with other aerobic forms of activity. But then there's a rhythmic piece. So you're also often in training to musical rhythms, which is key. There's a creative piece. You're often, improvisation, for example, or choreography, you're generating new movement. There's a social and emotional piece to it. You're often dancing in social communities, right? And then dance often evokes emotion, whether you're watching it or kind of doing it. and all these things. And then there's a cognitive piece to it too, especially when you're learning choreography.
Yeah.
It's engaging the hippocampus, kind of that short-term to long-term memory consolidation. So there's all these things that maybe are not happening if you just go out on a run.
And what are the benefits of that consolidation in the hippocampus? Like, what does that just improve people's memory? Are there other neurological benefits that people would realize as a result of that consolidation in the hippocampus?
Sure. So, in the rodent literature, it's definitely been shown that exercise, physical voluntary wheel running, is one of the best things that you can do, right? There's increases in neurogenesis, the birth and growth of neurons in the brain, specifically in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. So there's all kinds of improvements that are seen, especially with spatial navigation, learning and memory, novel object recognition, pattern separation and completion. So all these things that, we consider what are called hippocampal dependent tasks, being able to associate pairs of things with one another, associative learning, for example, and also episodic memory. And we show that in one of our studies, that the episodic memory, which is kind of the ability to remember our lives, remember the story of our lives, improves. And so why is this important? I think it's especially important for as we're aging, because it's one of the first things to degenerate as we age. And, if anybody has loved ones with dementia, my dad currently has dementia, and mom, with short-term memory loss, they often get lost. They don't know where they are in space and time and space, and they get confused, even if we're in a very familiar environment. Mom asking me, where's the bathroom? Even though, it's down the hall many, many times we've been there already. Yeah. So the fact, if you can get an exercise regimen on board, continue exercising, engaging in these activities, you're going to be better off as you age, for sure.
And so it would potentially help prevent some of those effects.
Yes.
Does it have any impacts for those that maybe already have it in terms of helping manage the symptoms a little bit better?
Oh, definitely. There's some beautiful work with David Levinson and the Mark Morris Dance Company with Dance for Parkinson's Disease. And some of that work is showing that, when you have a dance program for individuals, say with Parkinson's disease, which is another neurodegenerative disease, being able to expose them to music, all of a sudden they come alive, even though if they're frozen, right? All of a sudden they're expressive through their body, through their face. Yeah. And so, there have been studies showing too that if you get aging individuals that already have kind of that progressive dementia, to sustain a physical activity regimen over the course of, say, a year, instead of losing neural tissue, they'll actually either sustain or increase in neural tissue. So even if you already, it's good no matter what. And what that really shows us, and then also kind of studies in the rodent literature as well. Henriette Ben Prague did some beautiful research on voluntary wheel running and neurogenesis, and looking at these aged animals. Plasticity is possible throughout our entire lives. So it's always good no matter where you are. And even if you're stabilized in a wheelchair, and there's things you can do. You can do chair yoga, you can do movements from the upper body, or you can do breathing, right? You can do meditation. Yeah. You don't need to be very physical or mobile to do some of these techniques.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely very accessible, or at least there's different modalities that had accessibility in them.
Exactly.
I'm thinking to myself, like I was talking with Brenda, like I'm not a dancer by nature, so I didn't grow up dancing. And so do you see like, you mentioned the theater group you're working with, like do people that have a certain level of experience or perhaps training, are they, doing better or getting better results than maybe novice dancers who just kind of show up and are just trying to figure it out for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do a lot of our studies in novice participants, and so getting people to move when maybe they haven't in the past, or maybe they're just, finding entry into this space. So I think it's beneficial for a range of abilities, and wherever your VO2 max or your cardiopulmonary function is, there's room for improvement. We did a study at NYU with Dr. Wendy Suzuki showing that even if you have a moderate fitness, there's still gains, and you can gain in your hippocampal defensive functioning, and you can gain cardiovascularly, but you can also gain kind of cognitively and through mood states and so forth. So yeah, it's good for all of us, really.
Right. In one of our conversations earlier, you mentioned the benefits of kind of, you're obviously tracking brain waves during this activity of dance, but that you notice that when two people begin to dance together, that there becomes a synchrony between the oscillation of brain waves and the participants who are kind of joining together now are kind of synchronizing.
Yeah.
What has this research opened up for you, and what does it tell us about, I guess, the power of the importance of doing things in community?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the most exciting things to me that we're doing. And right, one of the biggest effects that we really see in some of these dance paradigms is the social connection that starts to happen. And so what I call it the body-mind community connection, that we really see improvements in social cognition and social connection. There was a recent meta-analysis showing that of many different physical activity forms, dance is the best at promoting social cognition. And so it's really helps to enhance our community connectedness. So we started to explore that at the level of the brain, especially because in dance, we train interpersonal synchrony or interpersonal connection through things like movement mirroring, where we have one person move and then another person follows kind of as exactly as they can, and then vice versa. Or we do something like movement conversation, where say, if you would offer a movement and then I would respond with movement. And it's nonverbal communication, really. So whether we're doing it synchronously or asynchronously, we're very curious about this idea of, can we get these neural oscillations to pair? Because when you have partnerships, either romantic partnerships, friendships, teacher-student relationships, and especially parent-child relationships, you're really seeing what has been shown is that neural synchrony, especially in particular brain regions like medial prefrontal cortex and temporoparietal junction, what are considered social brain areas, they show similar and related neural oscillations. And so it's the idea of, that's phrase of, oh, we're on the same wavelength, and connecting with one another, because if your brain is operating in a similar fashion to mine, we can kind of understand one another. And so we're trying to train this through dance. And we're doing this in one of our new studies on mother-child dance for moms with depression. Because often in states of depression, default mode network, which is kind of our these internal states, there's a lot of negative rumination thinking, where you're kind of focused on the internal, you're not very external. It's especially for moms, right? It might be hard to connect with their partners. It might be hard to connect with their children, their babies. And so can we use these dance practices and forms of nonverbal communication to help expand their awareness, which we know it does, right? It's helping executive function. And then can we get them to then connect with baby? And so we're showing that these dance programs really help with depression. They decrease levels of depression, and they increase the parent-child relationship. And so, which is really important. Yeah.
That's super impactful.
Yeah.
And so is there a specific type of, so I'm thinking for maybe people who aren't around the Virginia area, is there a specific type of dance therapy that a mom and a child would have to go to, or is just simply participating in normal dance classes together that might be in whatever local community, sufficient enough to kind of help with this pairing?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you certainly can seek out a dance movement therapy practice and training, which, you can find probably in more bigger city locations. I know certainly in New York City, I had found some. But yeah, there's often a lot of like mom-child classes here, even in our local Blacksburg Dance Theater. There's mother-child classes. And that's kind of how we got the idea, because I'm very connected with Rachel Rue, who is a professor of practice here in our School of Performing Arts and runs Blacksburg Dance Theater. And all these classes were happening. And I said, let's start something. So, yeah.
You're a mother, right? And so how has your studies, the things you've learned through dance, meditation, all of it, impacted the way in which you raise your children? Is there something you think that you do in particular that is somewhat unique, or maybe that parents could considerably not be as familiar with?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. I've never been asked that. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, so Right. I am always thinking about that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's all about co-regulation. So I am super aware of the fact that my regulatory abilities affect how they're doing. I don't always do a fantastic job with it. So I know that, okay, I'm totally dysregulated now. Now my children are dysregulated. And, but we do a lot of these practices, especially when they were younger. For example, we'll do breathing practices, but how do you do that with a kid?
Yeah.
So, we're going to reach for a flower and we're going to blow up the dandelion leaves and things like this.
Right.
Or we do things like if somebody is really dysregulated and we're having a tantrum, I just start to pretend to be a lion or, and then, who's the baby lion, and we play animals and kind of dance and move in that way. So I tried to bring that, into that space when they were younger. Now,
so when a child's having a meltdown, just initiating play will immediately kind of disarm them a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Sometimes I would just pick them up and spin them to get the vestibular system going, tickles, sensory touch. And now, Juliet is a little bit older. She's 10, Holden 6. And so, hugs, touch, intentional eye contact. Of course, if there's sensory issues, there might be, something different that you need to do. But yeah, definitely be in that play space really, really is helpful.
Yeah, That's awesome. I'm taking notes as like an uncle, aspiring to be number one uncle. Like, okay, make sure I got to spin them and play. I could do this. I could do that. It's very interesting. What about creativity? I've been curious about creativity. I wouldn't say I've been creatively inclined most of my life. And so like I'm trying to get things, we talked about this, like I was like, I want to try this dance. I want to do improv. I wanted to get things to stimulate more brain activity, more creativity. Are there things that you could do with children to help stimulate creativity, or does that kind of fall in the same bucket of the things you just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think, children are creatively inclined.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a fun space to be with them in that way because they're ready to do it and they're ready to engage in play. And so I think the children, they naturally want to play, and sometimes getting into that space as an adult and being able to open up that opportunity to play. As a matter of fact, in our mother-child study, the control group was play, mother-child play. And so it wasn't in necessarily intentional play. So moms would sometimes sit out and look at play from afar. But I think if you can get in there and just, you're playing Legos, you're playing whatever, that they're interested in, and trying to be mindful about it kind of helps that co-creativity, and I think we're also seeing too in our studies creativity in terms of adults, that co-creativity is another way to kind of share that experience. So we actually had another study on stone carving, and we recorded the brains of stone carvers as they were carving together. And so we're very curious about like doing creative practices together. And you're mindful, you're in the moment. So it's a kind of another way to cultivate these states where you're not ruminating about the past or projecting into the future, like, for example, crafting, right? Doing origami or bonsai tree. And some of these forms, right, they're craft meditation.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important to kind of try to bring these into daily life or play with your child because, it definitely can bring a presence of mind.
Right. Very interesting. Oh, synchronization of the brains. With the stone crafting, did you find that they were getting into synchronous brain oscillation waves?
Yeah, so those were the most amount of brains we've recorded at once. So we recorded 4 at once.
Wow.
And we're still on the journey of exploring like how can you statistically model, 4 brains at once?
Yeah.
But that's the idea, because what we did find was that yes, after their co-creative practice, they felt more socially connected as a community, and they're called the Backyard Stone Carvers. And so it's a group out in Newport, Virginia. And we actually went into their space in the cold fall a few years ago and set up our electrophysiology equipment there. And so, co-creative experiences are really important to cultivate. We showed decreases in depression and anxiety and improvements in social connection. And often these things tend to be related to one another. So the more mood improvement you're getting, then the more socially connected you're feeling to others.
What do you think the implications are for business teams or athletic teams in this type of studies? As I think about the connectedness you're talking about, having
Right.
receptivity with people who are on similar wavelengths, right? But I know in some business contexts, obviously getting a group of people together to go dance might not be, although
Right.
fun, it might not be feasible. Are there other ways in which like a business or sports team can think about this, of how to kind of utilize the benefits of this brain synchrony in other ways that might be different than what they're doing today?
Sure. I know. I think that's a great idea, especially because if we can get teams to organize together and, I don't think it's completely unfeasible to have, some of these movement practices that might be embedded, or even group meditation, group breathing in the morning or things like that that could be easily led, as a team. But even things like, and my postdoctoral mentor did this, but we had a tea meditation, a tea ceremony. And so we did that. There was no speaking involved, and Dr. Suzuki made the tea, and there was a whole table of us, right? And then she would pour the tea and we would drink the tea. So I think any of these meditative practices, that the team would feel comfortable with, can help build team connection. Even, right, like teams do, sometimes we would go, either paintballing together or do something like a laser tag and things like this. So I think group action together can help, and that you often feel kind of connected to your team or your group after those things.
And have you observed or studied the effects virtually? Because I think about some teams that might be remote or just like kind of dispersed. Do you see the similar benefits or the same benefits?
Yeah, well, we did a study during COVID, and we couldn't be together, and so, but we still wanted to dance. And, right, so we had the dance teacher in the space, and then everybody else was online at home in their living rooms or bedrooms or wherever. So we call it dancing online together. And we found that even online, that you could cultivate, after even just an hour-long session, we saw improvements in positive affect, decreases in depression and anxiety, improvements in self-esteem, and then improvements in social connection. And so we were surprised. It was a master's student of mine, Ashley Humphreys, who did that work. And we were very excited to find those results. So even online can work.
That's awesome. That's good to know. It's good to know.
Do you wake up with dry mouth, or have you ever been told you snore? Did you know mouth breathing can disrupt your sleep, reduce oxygen absorption, and even contribute to snoring? It's time to optimize your breathing with MyoTape from the Oxygen Advantage. This simple, comfortable tape encourages nasal breathing, leading to deeper, more restful sleep, improved energy levels, and better overall health. I've noticed a huge difference since using it myself. Visit the link in the show notes and use code GOODVIBES to get an exclusive listener discount of 5% on all products from the Oxygen Advantage. Sleep better, breathe better with MyoTape.
I got to say, part of this podcast is sitting down with people who I think have taken a non-traditional route. And I think the intersection of perhaps neuroscience and dance would be non-traditional. Maybe you disagree, but I'm just curious, like, how did this come about and come together for you to be the two areas of pursuit for you? Because they seem somewhat at odds fundamentally.
I totally got that all the time when I was younger, for sure. I've been dancing my entire life, probably since I was 3 or 4. And started out at Marcia Highland in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I just always loved movement, but then grew up in a medical family. So my dad was an ER doc, my mom was an ER nurse. But then my dad was also an artist, a visual artist, and he never got to do his art as a doctor. I didn't really see him very much growing up. He was always away at the hospital or in the office. And so by then I kind of was like, well, maybe I don't want to do that, And so I was exploring, like, well, what could I do? And then in college, I went to Middlebury College, and then I double majored in dance and neuroscience. And so during that time, I was really able to dive into both of those areas. And the dance program that was taught was very much in the world of somatics. And so really learning about the body and its connection to the nervous system. So I was actually learning a lot about the nervous system when I was on the dance floor. And then neuroscience, it was the first year actually that neuroscience became a major at Middlebury. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a cool new thing. And I started taking some classes there, and it was just then very much naturally fit. I did my dance thesis in college on concepts surrounding neuroscientific concepts. And then I did my neuroscience thesis on the effects of yoga, on breathing state and mood. And so kind of, things were overlapping then. And then I just continued, and, I continued to pursue movement throughout my PhD years and my postdoc years. And then when I started my own lab, I just decided to dive, fully into that space.
Yeah. Breathing and playing all this. We've highlighted this during meditation, dance. We talked about kind of the different areas. What role does breathing play in everything when it comes to nervous system regulation, whether that's upregulating and a sympathetic response or helping downregulate and getting that parasympathetic response?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's, and I realized this when I was first teaching about the sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. We do 2 lectures on this. And when you look at all the systems that are regulated by the peripheral nervous system, breathing is the only one that you can really control. And so all of a sudden, you as a human being have access to your nervous system in this very controlled way. And of course, we have pranayama and all these very specific techniques that we can do. But it's essentially a way to access the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. And I know you were doing more of your hyperventilation breathing practices. Earlier in our yoga class, we did some ujjayi breathing. And so, and I always teach this, like, it's not that the sympathetic nervous system is bad and the parasympathetic nervous system is good. It's that you want a flexible balance between these 2 things. And sometimes we're in sympathetic overdrive if we're in fight, flight all the time, we need to cool it down. So let's do some slow paced, deep, calm breathing. Maybe we'll do a nice shavasana after that, right? And we're going to leave feeling really, really good, really calm because we needed that. But sometimes we might be in parasympathetic overdrive where it's like, we can't drag ourselves out of bed. We're like Netflix and chilling and right, that's all we got. So we need to come out of that space to get some work done, to be active, right? Move through the world. And so maybe we do on some hyperventilation, fire breath, for example. So there's different ways, I think, as a yoga teacher, as a dance teacher, that you want to think about, the space that you're teaching, or even for your personal practice, what do I need today and how can I help balance my own system?
Yeah. Is that the body telling the brain it's okay, or that it's time to wake up? In what role does the vagus nerve play in all this? You hear about a lot of this vagus nerve stimulation and how does that tie into kind of this connection between what we're trying to signal to the brain?
Yeah. I was just at Floyd Yoga Jam and I took a neuro yoga class. That was fun. She was doing all kinds of things to stimulate the vagus nerve, which is kind of this huge branch of neurons, in our peripheral nervous system that 80% is a parasympathetic nervous system drive and really helps to cool, calm down the body. And so we can do some of these practices to activate the vagus nerve. But as I understand, it's a lot more complex. There's that, but there's also the inhalation of kind of the diaphragm, right? And all of these stretch receptors in our bodies. There's tons of neurons from the lungs and from the heart to the brain. 40,000 from the heart to the brain, for example. So there are all these organ connections that are really important. So there's this whole interoceptive system that's helping to regulate this bidirectional relationship essentially. And that, when we start to breathe, our pre-Bossinger complex is then connected to the locus coeruleus, which releases norepinephrine. So, and the opioid system is involved in there too. So there's a lot of it's a whole complex system that involves neurochemicals. The slow oscillatory breathing, as we were talking about before, helps coordinate these gamma rhythms. So we feel more embodied and grounded. So I think that there's it's a multifaceted thing at play, but I know that people, and then there's that wonderful book, the polyvagal theory. And so, it's an exciting area, and kind of people talk about vagus nerve stimulation and how can you access that through, we were doing things like circling in our inner ear.
Oh, I hadn't heard that
one
one.
way, circle the other. We, covering up eyes, covering up ears, and doing all kinds of things to kind of stimulate that.
Interesting.
The nerve.
How long do you have to do the ear one to?
It was some minutes. We were circling in the ear, both fingers in there.
Oh, okay.
It was wild. So,
I have to put down my mic. And then what's the eye? You just rotate between?
Yeah, just covering eyes, covering ears. And I know there's that, is it called the bee breath maybe, where
you do a little hum.
Yeah,
they say the humming is supposed to be good for the vagus. Okay.
Exactly. So all of those things where you're stimulating, and she had us massage neck, and I think and I'll teach that in class too, like the self massage, where you're massaging all of these different areas of the face, and even if you can do a body scan where you're really allowing all those facial muscles to relax, and so I think there's a lot of different things you can do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think, all this stuff is so cool. We could talk forever about this, but I did want to segue a little bit to the addiction side of things, because I was very fascinated that there was a lot of research that you do also around addiction as well, which was surprising to me, because I know when I first reached out or saw everything, I was mostly thinking yoga, dance, breath work, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And so how did the addiction piece come into the play, and what have you learned from that research and studies that you think helps inform some of the other things you're doing with health and wellness in general?
Yeah. So, and it brings up a point, because my wonderful mentor, Dr. Warren Bickel, just recently passed away, but he brought me in as a senior research associate to the Center for Health Behaviors Research, and that's over at the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute. And he also ran the Addiction Recovery Research Center. So I served in both spaces. And we were looking at this thing called delay discounting as kind of a marker for a few things. And what delay discounting is kind of this idea of how we value certain things. If we're willing to wait a long time for reward, for example, or if we would like to acquire, an immediate reward right now.
Right.
And so individuals with substance use disorder, for example, have a very steep discounting curve, meaning that, they want it here, they want it now, they want it immediately. Whereas, if there's less addictive tendency, then, you're willing to wait for longer rewards. And this might be things like, let's think about education, right? Getting a college degree, or family life, like cultivating relationships with friends, with family, business, like I'm going to get a career and I'm going to make money. It's going to be lucrative.
Right.
All those things.
Education, finances, everything.
That kind of stuff takes a long time to acquire, the future planning kind of piece. And so individuals with substance use disorder are more interested in immediate rewards. And of course, drugs of abuse fall under that purview.
Right.
Alcohol, for example, because it gives the brain an immediate burst of dopamine, endogenous opioids, endocannabinoids, all those good things, right? Those good feeling things. And so, we were exploring this not only in substance use disorder, but also in obesity and diabetes, because all of a sudden food comes into that space. And when we were talking about ultra processed foods, right?
Yep.
And often in those conditions, you're reaching for things like Doritos and, sweet treats and all your, high fat, high sugar, ultra processed. And those foods impact the brain very differently than, say, our carrots or our broccoli or a nice little salad, right? So all of a sudden, the delayed discounting curves in individuals with obesity and diabetes, showed to be very similar to what's going on in substance use disorders. So we utilize this thing, and this is kind of where the connection comes, called episodic thinking, whereby you can start to create a list for yourself of things that you might want to engage, in the future, like, in 5 years, I will be, on a beach in Jamaica, with my family, something that I'm kind of looking forward to, or in 2 years, I'm going to have my master's degree in business, things that you can really cultivate for yourself, or even, in 6 months, I will not be eating Doritos, whatever it might be, something that you kind of hopes and dreams, and you cultivate those for yourself. And then we as research scientists in this episodic future thinking paradigm through app-based technology can kind of dole these out to you, and especially in moments of stress, for example, but periodically give you these, essentially meditation, right?
Yeah.
Like a meditation on thinking about the future. And it's interesting because Warren, Dr. Bickle and I would always talk about this. It's like, well, meditation, we're in the here and now, yet episodic future thinking.
Right.
And so there's this kind of, what is going on. We're interested in exploring these two things maybe in the future. But yeah, it would be all about like increasing or really decreasing your delay discounting curve by allowing you to dream about the future. And of course, when you think about the brain, it's like that's activating areas like the hippocampus, like the prefrontal cortex, areas that are impaired and impacted when substance use is on board.
Right. And so that's the parallel. If we could take that episodic future thinking, which reminds me also of storyboarding or vision boarding or goals, or right, and just visualization, I guess in general, these cues, they could also be parallel to help people maybe form more healthy habits just in general around why I should go to the gym or do my meditation or whatever, even if they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's all about bringing in health behaviors and kind of gearing away towards smoking cigarettes or utilizing your drug of choice or drinking alcohol. And, and if somebody, say, with obesity or with a food addiction comes to the refrigerator and maybe they utilize it there. So, okay, I'm going to make a food choice now, but maybe my food choice is not going to be a cupcake. It's going to be, a fruit salad.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of about those choices that then really impact over the long term.
That's really awesome. I love that. I love that parallel. In terms of addiction, you mentioned the certain drugs impact certain neurotransmitters, I guess, or different opioids and things that are internal. You also mentioned earlier, and I'm probably going to butcher some of this, so I apologize. Okay. But in the beginning, you mentioned in some instances, when we do meditation or certain things, we've shown to be as effective, if not in some cases more effective than the pharmacology, because we can tap into some of these things that, whatever, serotonin, dopamine, whatever, that make us feel good. We could basically be our own pharmacy in some respects. Some of those things are happening in call it a meditation or an exercise context, but also are happening in a substance abuse context. How does the body delineate, or like when does these things that can become potentially harmful, like where's the line? How, can exercise go awry too? I guess I don't know. I guess I know
what you're saying.
These things could be good and bad, I guess.
Right. So yes, for example, being in a romantic relationship, feeling in love, kind of having a sexual encounter with somebody, right? All these things are stimulating all of those same reward circuits,
right.
Or eating food, or exercising, right? But then those things are considered like healthy habits. You're going to be a social person, right? You're going to eat well. You're going to have your exercise regimen going. But what ends up happening in substance use disorder, or again with those ultra processed foods, is that it's stimulating the brain to extreme scenarios, like the dopamine drive will be, those neurons will be firing repeatedly in a way that is significantly over and above what would be happening in what are called natural reinforcers. So the kind of amount or amplitude of the signal is going to be very heightened. And then the brain kind of has an expectation that, hey, I experienced that much reward, in this moment in time, can I do that again? And it all of a sudden has an experience. And, like, for example, with crack cocaine, I was just watching that Charlie Sheen documentary that came out, right?
Oh, is that good? I haven't seen that one yet.
But he was explaining, like, the first time that he tried crack cocaine, and it's like that he's never experienced anything like that, and it is because the brain is having an experience that it had never experienced before. And now all of a sudden your consciousness realizes, oh, hey, that is what I want. That was so rewarding that let's do it again.
Yeah.
But the problem is with drugs like that, right? You're always kind of chasing that high and you're never able to, or you need more and more and more. With things like exercise or food, there are different levels that are happening there. And so, certainly there are food addictions, there are exercise addictions.
Yeah.
So things are happening there where there's a dysregulation of the system in certain instances. But the general levels that people are consuming with, moderate exercise regimen or, food consumption kind of stays within that moderate range where the brain is stimulated, but not hyper stimulated like in those other situations.
So I almost think of too, like also like in some sense with the natural stuff, it's like an earned reward as opposed to like if something's right here, it's just like kind of like an easy button in some instances.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess ease of access, I guess, could also drive that too, and that receiving that reward. But it also sounds like it raises the baseline of tolerable dopamine.
Yeah, and like we were talking about the brain as this like prediction unit, right? Like this reward prediction error kind of like it predicts a certain state, and all of a sudden when the brain experiences something totally new, its prediction accuracy then says, oh hey, like okay, this is now a thing I can experience, and let's try for that again and again. And so then the physical body and all the reward circuitry is driving the motor cortex to say, let's do that. How do we find that again?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Working hard but not seeing the muscle growth you want. Taking collagen or protein might not be enough. You could be missing essential building blocks. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Body Health's Perfect Amino Tablets. These tablets provide all 8 essential amino acids in the perfect ratio for optimal muscle protein synthesis, recovery, and overall health. They're a game changer for anyone looking to build lean muscle mass, boost energy, and support healthy aging. Fuel your body with the best. Visit the Body Health link in the show notes and use code NEW20 for a 20% discount on your first order. Unlock your potential with Body Health.
I believe in one of your studies, and there is a reference to the importance of opening up neuroplasticity as in folks who are recovering from addiction as a way to perhaps overcome or prevent relapse in addiction. And maybe I'm misreading some things in that note, but I know we've talked a lot about neuroplasticity and how it in meditation, these certain forms of modalities we're talking about, there's this experience where people are opening up neural pathways.
Mm-hmm.
Do those tend to harden, I guess, when folks are forming an addiction to substances? And, I guess, what is the importance of neuroplasticity for people who are trying to overcome addiction?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, yeah, when we think about things, and we're talking a little bit about depression and something like obsessive compulsive disorder, and then definitely with substance use disorder, you have this neural state. When you do something, when you something happens in your life, there are neural circuits that are firing during the time of that action. Let's say, the first time Charlie Sheen tried crack cocaine, there's a particular set of neurons that are firing during that experience. And so that when we go to sleep later, those same neurons fire again, in a concise time frame. It's called replay in the hippocampus to then consolidate the memory. So when that memory is later recalled, it's the same group of neurons that are firing. So there's this kind of consolidation of information. There's a certain set of these neurons. And when something when it's paired with really heightened reward with the dopamine system, those neuronal circuits become very hyper activated, kind of hyper embedded, and will fire and repeat fire again, which is why in things like substance use disorder or like OCD, you see these same repetitive behaviors time and time again, either seeking out, drugs of abuse, or say in someone with OCD having to tap a finger 5 times, whatever it might be, before something is done. And so these patterns of actual physical behavior are really embedded in the brain. And so, yes, if we can find a way to inject some neuroplasticity, some opening of those neural circuits, that would be a really good thing for some of these disorders, And of course, exercise is my go-to. Physical activity is one of the best ways to induce neuroplasticity. But really getting, we were talking about that flexibility between sympathetic, parasympathetic. Any of these things can really be drivers to help the brain be more flexible.
And when we talk about neuroplasticity, I've sat down with folks who have been 50 years sober through the AA program. And I've also sat down with folks who are kind of on the forward edge of psychedelics as a form of treatment for PTSD and a slew of other things as well. And I've heard, and through my own research, have explored that psychedelics can have this very opening of the neural pathways thing. And so, but it's also kind of interesting because I think there's also still some stigma around psychedelics in general as also being a drug, right? Sure. Which may or may not be, classified appropriately. But I'm just wondering how does that tie into this conversation, and what's the efficacy of psychedelics as a form of potentially treating addiction? And have you seen or explored anything in that space?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in that research. Haven't done anything with it personally, but yeah, I talk about this with my husband a lot, and who's a neurophysiologist, and we talk about this idea of the brain's manifold. And you can imagine that, if consciousness is riding on this manifold state, and in things like depression and substance use disorder, is a very static state. And like, how can we open up that manifold to make it more plastic and movable, and kind of allow our conscious experience to navigate around, particular experiences. So yes, I think, psychedelics, ketamine is being used right now, especially with states of depression. There have been a lot of studies with psilocybin, for example, for individuals, kind of towards end of life experiences and having a lot of psychological trauma surrounding that, that are really effective. Because I think what it's doing is you're putting the brain all of a sudden into a very different neural state where different conscious experiences might occur, and you might notice different things about body and mind states, and memory, and things are altered in this way. And so you're really putting the brain into a completely different manifold, if you will, that can then open space for neuroplasticity in this really like stark, immediate way.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know that like hallucinogenic experiences can have these long lasting effects. The plasticity can happen in these microsecond moments. So yeah, so it's a very curious space. One, we kind of talk about getting into, especially in the rodent space, but not quite yet.
Well, speaking of not quite yet, I've heard about a lot of the upcoming research, but I was wondering if you could share with the audience over the next couple of years, like what some of the projects you're working on currently that you're really excited about, like future research, and what do you think it will do to inform health or just enhance the conversation that we've been having today?
Yeah, so one of the things, and we're just about to start next Monday. Our first participants will come in, but we have been awarded the Renee Fleming NeuroArts Investigator Award. And this is a study for young adults with ADHD to study the impact of DJing and hip hop music production, which is kind of an interesting and new space for us. And we're also partnering with Alpha Theta, Pioneer DJ, for this project. And so we're really looking to see if DJing and that ability to produce music and listen to music, cultivate sound, can help with focus and attention for these young adults. And we're partnering with Virginia Tech Digging in the Crates here at Virginia Tech, who's our hip hop studies group. And they're going to be actually teaching the intervention, which is really exciting. And so we'll be looking at a whole variety of things before and after this 4-week DJing experience, things like depression and anxiety and ADHD symptoms and cognitive function, all the executive functions, attention and short-term memory and things like that. And really looking at if a DJ practice and learning to DJ can help improve these symptoms for these individuals. Because often when we think about ADHD in particular, there's shortages of medications. Yeah. The medications work in kind of an 8 to 12 hour time frame. And often like they're wearing off during the day. We get a lot of reports like by 5 o'clock, I'm just zonked, that kind of thing. Yeah. So no matter whether you're on, amphetamines, methylphenidate, no matter where you are kind of in your journey, there's always room for adjunctive therapies. And so that's what we're exploring to see if this kind of thing could help. Or for example, if you run out of medication or the medication's not available, then, can you DJ? Can you get into that space, to be able to feel better?
Right. Yeah, I find this conversation so interesting when we talk about the frequency and vibrations that come from DJing, and even the documentary you referenced that we talked about earlier, and then also the brainwaves and things. I mean, I've told you a little bit earlier about this, coherence, heart-brain coherence tracker I wear sometimes when I meditate to track brainwaves. Like, what is the efficacy, though, of like potentially things that have, like, I think of like a sound bed or external frequencies on helping shift frequencies, not even just in the brain, but really any part of the body. Because like, I'm thinking of like bioresonance style of, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I know it's really big in Germany of like this, we're going to pump certain frequencies into different parts of the body to help with dysfunction, to help get to a more optimal frequency based on whatever. And so I'm just wondering, like, how interesting is this stuff? Like, how effective do you feel like it could be or is for external sound to affect health and brainwave and frequencies?
And I don't know too much about that space, but what we do know and we're exploring with alpha theta is this idea of like, can you use alpha rhythms? Can you use theta rhythms, these binaural beats, for example, to change particular brain states? Because what ends up happening is that, we have these sound signals, these musical rhythms that come into the ear, they get broken down by the auditory cortex into their particular resonant frequencies. And these sound waves, get translated into brain waves that then are translated into our motor cortex. And that's why, when we hear some good music and we start to like move to the rhythm, that's exactly why, because, our brain is processing those auditory rhythms. And so, I think it could be very effective. And that's kind of one of the things that we're exploring and starting to get into the space of like, okay, well, if you're listening to these particular tracks that are intended, and I know you can go online and grab the alpha rhythms and the theta rhythms,
right?
But how is it tracking in the brain, and what are the subsequent effects?
Right.
So this is something we're starting to explore, and then subsequently our DJing study is kind of all about this.
We're going to highlight that too. Interesting, very interesting. We've talked about a whole lot today.
Yeah.
Is there anything you felt like we didn't touch on that you're super excited about, or that we talked about a little bit, but should probably dive in a little bit deeper?
No, just that, we've also been supported by the National Endowment of the Arts just recently, which is really exciting for our mother-child dance work for moms with depression.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start digging into that. We have a new PhD student in the lab who kind of will be taking on that work. And as we start to dig in there, we're really going to get into the hyperscanning piece, looking at the dyadic connections at the level of behavior and at the level of the brain. So a lot of good things coming up.
So if someone wants to get involved, I'm thinking particularly the postpartum depression, like, can they just sign up to be part of the study? Or do you still have openings to work with people? Like, how can people get involved with some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, certainly. So they can contact us at embodiedbrainlab@gmail.com or visit us at embodiedbrainlab.com or just find us on Instagram at Embodied Brain Lab. A lot of Embodied Brain Lab. Just look up Embodied Brain Lab and then get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Basso, I can't thank you enough. I think the work you're doing is absolutely incredible. I've done yoga and meditation for many years and have always been curious behind, like, what's the science behind some of this stuff. And I just think the work that you're doing across so many fronts that I wasn't unaware of, with autism, with postpartum depression, with addiction, with so many facets. You mentioned increases in dementia earlier, also increases with mental health issues and suicide, depression, anxiety, all these things. And to think that, stuff like dancing, 13 minutes of meditation, and some exercise routines could have such a big impact on our brain health, our body health. I think it's super awesome. And anything that we can do to help spread the message and the work that you're doing, I'm happy to do so, because I think it's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.